I never believed in miracles until I found one shivering on the chapel steps, wrapped in linen too fine for the snow that fell like ash upon its tiny face. That Christmas Eve, the world was silent except for the wind, and I was alone with my grief when I heard the cry that would change everything. The chapel of Greystone had been my sanctuary for 3 years, ever since I became a widow at 22. My husband Thomas had been a kind man, a schoolteacher with gentle hands and a cough that never left him. When he died, I was left with nothing but his books and a talent for music that my mother had insisted I cultivate despite our modest means. The position as chapel organist paid little, but it gave me a place to belong, a roof over my head in the small cottage behind the churchyard, and a purpose that kept me from drowning in memories. That evening, I had stayed late to practice the hymns for Christmas morning. The chapel was cold, the candlelight wavering against the stone walls as my fingers moved across the keys. I had always loved this hour, when the world outside faded and I could lose myself in the music, in the only language that seemed to understand the ache I carried in my chest. But then I heard it, a sound so faint I thought at first it was the wind through the eaves, or perhaps a cat caught in the storm. When it came again, sharper now, more insistent, I rose from the bench and moved toward the heavy oak doors. The snow had been falling since afternoon, blanketing the village in a silence so complete it felt sacred. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders and opened the door, expecting to find nothing but the empty courtyard and the dark shapes of tombstones rising like sentinels in the white. Instead, there on the top step, nestled in a wicker basket lined with embroidered cloth, was a child, a newborn, no more than days old, wrapped in linen so delicate it seemed woven from moonlight itself. The baby's face was red from crying, tiny fists curled against the cold, and around its neck hung a silver chain with a locket I dared not touch. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment I could not move. I could only stand there staring as snowflakes settled on the basket's rim and melted into nothing. Then instinct overtook shock. I knelt and gathered the child into my arms, feeling the fragile warmth of its body against mine, and something inside me that had been frozen for so long began to crack. I carried the baby inside, closing the door against the storm, and moved toward the small vestry where I kept a fire burning on cold nights. My hands trembled as I unwrapped the linen, checking for any sign of injury or illness. The child was perfect, whole. A girl, I realized, with dark wisps of hair and eyes that had not yet settled into color. I had no milk to give her, no cradle, no knowledge of what to do. But I had blankets, and I had the fire, and I had a heart that remembered what it was to hold something precious. I wrapped her in my own shawl and held her close, rocking gently as I had once rocked another child, a son who had lived only 3 days before God took him back. The memory was a knife, but I welcomed the pain because it meant I had not forgotten how to feel. The baby quieted in my arms, her cries fading to soft whimpers, and I found myself whispering to her the way I had whispered to my own son in those brief, beautiful hours before he slipped away. I told her she was safe. I told her she was loved. I told her lies I desperately wanted to believe. That was when I heard the sound of a horse outside, hooves crunching through snow, followed by the slam of a carriage door and footsteps on the chapel stairs. Heavy footsteps, urgent. I clutched the baby tighter, suddenly afraid, as the door flew open and a figure stepped into the dim light. I knew who he was at once, though I had never spoken to him. Everyone in Greystone knew the Duke of Ravencourt. He was a man who existed in a different world from mine, a world of London ballrooms and country estates, of titles and wealth that stretched back centuries. He was rarely seen in the village, and when he was, it was only to pass through in his black carriage with the Ravencourt crest gleaming on its doors. I had seen him once, 2 years before, at a funeral for one of the tenant farmers. He had stood apart from everyone else, tall and unsmiling, his face carved from granite, his dark eyes seeing everything and revealing nothing. Now those eyes were fixed on the child in my arms, and the color drained from his face. He stood in the doorway, snow dusting his broad shoulders, his greatcoat hanging open as though he had dressed in haste. He was perhaps 35, with the kind of stern, aristocratic features that seemed designed to inspire respect rather than affection. His jaw was tight, his mouth a hard line, but it was his eyes that held me. They were wild with something I could not name, desperation perhaps, or fear. He did not greet me. He did not ask my name. He simply stared at the baby, and in that stare I understood that he knew exactly whose child this was. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled, the wind howled. The baby shifted in my arms, and the small movement seemed to break whatever spell had held him frozen. He stepped forward, his boots echoing on the stone floor, and stopped a few feet away as though afraid to come closer. "You found her," he said. His voice was low, rough, the kind of voice that commanded armies or silenced rooms. But there was a tremor in it now, barely perceptible, like a crack in marble. I held his gaze. I did. On the steps. Just now. She was alone. He closed his eyes briefly, and I saw his chest rise and fall with a breath that seemed to cost him something. When he opened his eyes again, they were harder, guarded, the vulnerability I had glimpsed already buried beneath layers of control. "Did you see who left her?" he asked. "No one," I said. There was no one, only the snow and the dark. He nodded slowly, as though this was what he had expected, what he had feared. His gaze moved over the baby, taking in the silver chain, the fine linen, the tiny face that was already beginning to resemble someone, though I could not say who. Then he looked at me, truly looked at me, and I felt the weight of his scrutiny, like a physical thing. "You are the organist," he said. It was not a question. "I am," I replied. "Eleanor Ashford." He did not offer his own name. He did not need to. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that I could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the shadows beneath his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly before he clenched them into fists. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, and his voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "I need your help." I said nothing. I simply waited, the baby warm against my chest, my heart beating too fast. "This child," he continued, "cannot be found here, cannot be known. If word spreads that she was abandoned at this chapel, there will be questions, questions I cannot allow to be asked." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Whose child is she?" I asked. He did not answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and withdrew a leather purse, heavy with coin, and held it out to me. "I will pay you," he said, "handsomely, more than you could earn in 10 years. All I ask is that you take her. Care for her. Say nothing of how she came to you." I stared at the purse, then at him. "You want me to take her," I said slowly, "to raise her." "For now," he said, "until I can make other arrangements." "And what arrangements are those?" He hesitated, and I saw the war playing out behind his eyes. "That is not your concern," he said finally. "I should have refused. I should have demanded answers, or gone to the constable, or done any number of sensible things. But I looked down at the baby in my arms, at her perfect, innocent face, and I thought of my own son, cold in the ground. I thought of the emptiness that had lived inside me since the day I buried him. I thought of the way this child had quieted at my touch, as though she recognized something in me, some echo of the mother she had lost. "I will do it," I heard myself say. "But not for your money." He frowned. "Then why?" "Because she has no one else," I said, "and neither do I." For a moment, something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or relief, or something more complicated that I could not read. Then the mask fell back into place, and he was once again the Duke, untouchable and remote. "I will send for you tomorrow," he said. "You will bring the child to Ravencourt Manor. There is a cottage on the estate, far from the main house where you will live. You will have everything you need: food, clothing, warmth. But you must tell no one, not the vicar, not your neighbors, no one." I nodded, though my mind was spinning. "And if someone asks where I have gone?" "Tell them you are visiting family," he said, "or that you have taken a position elsewhere. It does not matter, as long as they believe it." He placed the purse on the table beside me, though I had not agreed to take it. Then he turned to leave, his hand already on the door, when I called out to him, "Your Grace." He stopped, but did not turn. "The child's mother," I said. "Where is she?" The silence stretched. The fire crackled. The wind howled. "She is gone," he said at last, his voice hollow, "and she is not coming back." Then he walked out into the snow, and I was left alone with the baby and a dozen questions I knew he would never answer. I sat by the fire for a long time that night, holding the child, listening to the storm rage outside. I thought about the Duke's face when he had seen her, the way his carefully constructed composure had shattered for just an instant. I thought about the silver locket around her neck, which I had finally opened to find a miniature portrait inside. A young woman with dark hair and delicate features, her expression both defiant and sad. I did not recognize her, but I knew with certainty that this was the child's mother. The woman the Duke had said was gone. I wondered what had driven her to leave her baby on the chapel steps on Christmas Eve, alone in the snow. I wondered if she had stood in the shadows, watching, waiting to see if someone would find her daughter before the cold took her. I wondered if she had wept. But most of all, I wondered what kind of man the Duke of Ravencourt truly was. A man who would pay a stranger to hide a child. A man whose eyes held such pain, even as his voice remained steady and cold. A man who had looked at this baby and seen not a blessing, but a problem to be solved. I did not trust him, but I had already made my choice. The next morning, I packed my few belongings into a trunk, wrapped the baby in every warm thing I owned, and waited for the carriage that would take us away from the only life I had known. The snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed in white, pristine and silent. The chapel bells rang for Christmas morning, calling the faithful to worship, but I would not be there to play the hymns. Someone else would sit at the organ. Someone else would fill the space I had occupied. When the carriage arrived, black and imposing with the Ravencourt crest on its doors, I climbed inside without looking back. The driver said nothing. The horses moved forward, and Greystone faded into the distance. The baby slept in my arms, oblivious to the fact that her life had already been shaped by secrets and lies. I looked down at her small face and made a silent promise. Whatever happened, whatever the Duke intended, I would protect her. I would give her the love her mother could not, even if it broke me in the end. The cottage stood at the edge of the Ravencourt estate, hidden behind a wall of ancient oaks and ivy that seemed to have grown there deliberately, as though nature itself had conspired to keep secrets. It was larger than the place I'd left behind, with whitewashed walls and a slate roof that looked solid against the gray winter sky. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone had prepared for our arrival, and as the carriage stopped, I saw the door open and a woman emerge, wrapped in a dark cloak, her face obscured by the hood. She came forward as I stepped down, the baby still cradled in my arms, and pulled back her hood to reveal a face lined with age and something harder than time. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that assessed me with the efficiency of someone accustomed to measuring worth in an instant. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, her voice clipped and formal. "I am Mrs. Brennan, the housekeeper at Ravencourt Manor. His Grace has instructed me to see that you have everything you require. The cottage has been prepared. There is a nursery upstairs, provisions in the larder, and firewood enough to last the winter." I nodded. suddenly aware of how disheveled I must look after the journey, my dress rumpled, my hair escaping its pins. "Thank you," I said. She looked at the baby, and her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "The child appears healthy," she observed. "That is fortunate." "She was left in the snow," I said, hearing the edge in my own voice. "I would not call that fortunate." Mrs. Brennan's gaze sharpened. "His Grace has chosen you for your discretion, Mrs. Ashford. I trust you understand the gravity of that choice." It was not a question. It was a warning. "I understand," I said, though I was not certain I understood anything at all. She gestured toward the cottage. "Come, I will show you where everything is. His Grace will call upon you tomorrow to discuss the arrangements more thoroughly." The interior of the cottage was warm and surprisingly comfortable, furnished with pieces that were simple but well made. There was a sitting room with a fireplace already blazing, a kitchen stocked with more food than I had seen in months, and upstairs, 2 bedrooms. The larger one contained a bed with clean linens and a wardrobe filled with dresses in my size, all in muted colors, appropriate for a widow. The smaller room had been transformed into a nursery, complete with a cradle, blankets, and everything a child might need. I stood in the doorway of the nursery, holding the baby, and felt something tighten in my chest. Someone had thought of every detail. Someone had known I would say yes before I had even made the choice. Mrs. Brennan moved past me, her skirts rustling. "If you need anything, send word to the manor. Do not come yourself." His Grace was very clear about that. "You are to remain here, out of sight, until he determines otherwise." "And how long will that be?" I asked. She paused, her hand on the doorframe. "That is not for me to say. But I would advise patience, Mrs. Ashford. His Grace is a man who does not act without reason, even when his reasons are his own." With that, she left, and I was alone with the baby in a cottage that felt both like a refuge and a prison. The first days passed in a haze of sleeplessness and routine. The baby, whom I had begun to call Rose in my mind for the delicate pink of her skin, woke every few hours, demanding to be fed. I had hired a wet nurse from the village before leaving, a young woman named Mary who had recently lost her own child to fever and was grateful for the work. Mrs. Brennan had arranged for her to come each day, discreetly, through the back paths of the estate where she would not be seen. Mary asked no questions, and I offered no explanations. She fed Rose, sang to her in a soft voice that made my heart ache, and then disappeared again like a ghost. In the hours between Mary's visits, I held Rose and walked the small rooms of the cottage, trying to soothe her cries and my own restless thoughts. I had not expected to feel this way. I had thought I could care for her as a duty, a task I had agreed to fulfill. But the moment I looked into her eyes, dark and searching, I was lost. She was not my child, but she felt like mine in all the ways that mattered. The way she curled her tiny hand around my finger, the way she calmed when I hummed the lullabies my mother had once sung to me, the way she needed me. It was dangerous, this feeling. I knew it even then. But I could not stop it any more than I could stop the snow from falling or the sun from setting. The Duke came on the 3rd day, as Mrs. Brennan had promised. I heard the sound of his horse before I saw him, hooves striking the frozen ground. And then he was there, dismounting with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He wore riding clothes, dark and severe, and his face was as unreadable as it had been the night I found Rose. I met him at the door, Rose asleep in my arms, and stepped aside to let him enter. He removed his gloves slowly, his gaze moving over the cottage, taking in every detail as though cataloging it for future reference. Then he looked at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes before it vanished. "How is she?" he asked. "She is well," I said. "Mary comes each day to nurse her. She sleeps more than she cries, which I am told is a good sign." He nodded, still standing near the door, as though uncertain whether to come farther inside. "And you, Mrs. Ashford, are you comfortable here?" The question surprised me. "I am," I said. "The cottage is more than adequate. Mrs. Brennan has been very thorough." He seemed to relax slightly, though his posture remained stiff. "Good. That is good." Silence settled between us, awkward and heavy. I shifted Rose in my arms, and the movement drew his attention. He stared at her with an intensity that made me uneasy, as though he were searching for something in her small face, some answer to a question he could not ask. "Your Grace," I said quietly, breaking the silence, "I think it is time you told me the truth." His eyes snapped to mine. "I have told you what you need to know." "You have told me nothing," I countered. "You have given me a child to care for, hidden me away in this cottage, and asked for my silence. But I do not even know whose daughter she is. I do not know why you are so desperate to keep her existence a secret. I deserve to know." He turned away from me, walking to the window that overlooked the forest beyond, his hands clasped behind his back, his shoulders rigid. "You deserve nothing," he said, his voice cold. "You agreed to this arrangement. That is all that matters." I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and fierce. "I agreed because she needed someone," I said. "Because she is innocent and should not suffer for the sins of others. But I will not raise her in ignorance. If I am to be her caretaker, I must know what I am protecting her from." He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the trees outside. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low I had to strain to hear it. "She is my sister's child," he said. "Lady Catherine, the youngest of my family. She was 18 when she fell in love with a man unsuitable to her station, an artist, a nobody. I forbade the match, as was my right as head of the family. I thought she would obey. I thought she understood the consequences." He paused, and I saw his jaw tighten. "She did not obey. She ran away with him. For 6 months I heard nothing, no letters, no word. I sent men to search for her, but she had vanished completely. Then, 2 weeks ago, I received a message. Catherine was dying. Consumption. She asked me to come. My breath caught. "Did you go?" He nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I went. I found her in a boarding house in Manchester, a place so wretched I would not have kept my horses there. She was thin as paper, her skin gray, her lungs barely functioning. The artist had left her months before, when her money ran out and she could no longer support him. She had been alone, starving, dying. I felt tears prick my eyes, though I barely knew this woman. And the baby. She told me she had given birth 2 months earlier, that she had kept the child alive as long as she could, but she knew she would not live much longer. She begged me to take the baby, to protect her, to give her the life Catherine could not. And you agreed, I said softly. He turned to face me, and I saw the raw grief in his eyes, the guilt that had carved lines into his face. I agreed. What else could I do? She was my sister. I had already failed her. I could not fail the child as well. But why leave her at the chapel, I asked. Why not bring her here directly? He looked away again. Because society would never accept her. She is illegitimate. The daughter of a disgraced noblewoman and a penniless artist. If it became known that she exists, the scandal would destroy what is left of my family's name. My mother is elderly and frail. The shame would kill her, and the child herself would be marked forever, treated as less than human by the very people who should protect her. His voice broke slightly on the last words, and I saw him struggle to regain control. So I brought her to the chapel on Christmas Eve. I thought someone kind would find her. Someone who would take her to an orphanage or a foundling home where she could be raised in anonymity. I thought that was the best I could do for her. But I found her, I said, and you recognized her immediately. The locket. Yes, he said. The locket belonged to my sister. I gave it to her on her 16th birthday. When I saw it around the child's neck, I knew Catherine had marked her, had made certain that if I ever found her, I would know whose daughter she was. I looked down at Rose, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the tragedy that had brought her into this world. "She deserves better than this," I said. "She deserves to be loved, to be acknowledged." "And she will be," he said, stepping toward me. "But not yet. Not until I can find a way to protect her without destroying my family. Until then, she must remain hidden, and you must remain with her." I met his gaze, seeing the desperation there, the fear. "How long?" I asked. He shook his head. "I do not know. Months, perhaps, or years. It depends on many things. And if your mother dies," I said, the words harsh but necessary, "if the scandal becomes less dangerous, what then?" "Then I will find a way to bring her into the family," he said. "To acknowledge her as my ward, perhaps, or to claim her as the daughter of a distant cousin. Something that will give her a place in society without revealing the truth." "And what of her mother's memory?" I asked. "Will you tell her about Catherine, about what happened?" He hesitated. "When she is older," he said, "when she can understand. But not now, not while the pain is still so fresh." I wanted to argue, to tell him that secrets had a way of poisoning everything they touched, but I could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight he carried, and I knew he was doing the best he could with an impossible situation. "Very well," I said. "I will keep her safe. But I will not lie to her when she asks where she came from. I will tell her she is loved, that her mother wanted better for her. That is the truth that matters." He looked at me for a long moment, and I thought I saw something like gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Ashford," he said quietly. He moved toward the door, but I stopped him with a question I had been holding back. "Your Grace, why did you choose me? You could have found someone else, someone with more experience, someone you could trust not to ask questions." He paused, his hand on the door latch, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than I had ever heard it. "Because when I saw you holding her that night, you looked at her the way my sister should have been able to look at her. With love, with hope. I knew then that you would not see her as a burden or a secret. You would see her as a child, and that was what I needed." Then he left, and I stood alone in the cottage, holding Rose, my heart full of emotions I could not name. The days turned into weeks, and winter deepened its hold on the estate. Snow fell almost daily, blanketing the forest in white silence, and the world beyond the cottage seemed to disappear. I fell into a rhythm with Rose, learning the language of her needs, the difference between her hungry cry and her tired cry, the way she smiled when I sang to her and reached for my face with her small hands. Mary continued to come each day, and sometimes she stayed longer than necessary, sitting by the fire and telling me stories of the village, of the people I had left behind. "The vicar asked after you," she said one afternoon, her voice casual but her eyes watchful. "He wondered where you had gone so suddenly." I told him I had taken a position with a family in the north, I said, the lie smooth on my tongue now. He seemed satisfied. Mary nodded, but I saw the doubt in her expression. She was not a fool. She knew something was amiss. But she said nothing, and I was grateful for her discretion. The Duke came once a week, always in the late afternoon, always alone. He never stayed long. He would inquire about Rose's health, examine the accounts Mrs. Brennan kept for the household expenses, and then leave as abruptly as he had arrived. But I noticed small changes in him as the weeks passed. The lines around his eyes seemed to deepen. His hands, always so steady, sometimes trembled when he reached for his gloves. And once, when Rose laughed at something I said, I saw him smile. A brief, fleeting expression that transformed his face completely. "You care for her," I said one evening, emboldened by the warmth of the fire and the strange intimacy that had begun to grow between us. "Despite everything, you care." He looked at me, startled, as though I had spoken in a foreign language. "She is my responsibility," he said. That is not what I said. He turned away, but not before I saw the truth in his eyes. Yes, he said quietly. I care, more than I should. Why should you not? I asked. She is your blood, your sister's child. Because I cannot protect her if I allow myself to feel too much, he said. Because love makes us weak. It clouds judgment. It leads to ruin. My sister loved, and it destroyed her. I felt a sharp ache in my chest at his words. Love did not destroy your sister, I said. The world did. The world that would not allow her to choose her own happiness. That is what destroyed her. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. You speak as though you know something of it, he said. I do, I replied. I loved my husband and my son, and I lost them both. But I do not regret the love. I regret only that I did not have more time. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, his voice rough, You are braver than I, Mrs. Ashford. I shook my head. I am not brave. I am simply tired of living half a life. He studied me, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a touch. What would a full life look like to you? He asked. I did not have an answer. I held Rose closer and listened to the fire crackle and the wind howl outside, and I wondered if I would ever know. Spring came slowly to Ravencourt, creeping through the forest in shades of green and gold, melting the snow and revealing the earth beneath. By then, Rose was 4 months old, and I had learned to read her moods as easily as I once read music. She was a happy child, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and watching her discover the world with wide, wondering eyes filled something in me I had not realized was empty. The Duke's visits had become more frequent, though he never explained why. Sometimes he came twice a week, and once, during a particularly difficult night when Rose was ill with colic, he stayed until dawn, pacing the cottage floor with her in his arms, while I prepared warm compresses and spoke soothing words neither of us believed. In those long hours, something shifted between us. The formality that had defined our interactions began to crack, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the title. I learned that his name was Alexander, though I never dared use it. I learned that he had inherited the dukedom at 19, when his father died suddenly, leaving him to manage an estate on the brink of financial ruin and a family fractured by grief. I learned that Lady Catherine had been his favorite sibling, the only one who challenged him, who made him laugh, who reminded him that life was more than duty and obligation. And I learned that her death had broken something in him that he did not know how to repair. He rarely spoke of these things directly. Instead, they emerged in fragments, in offhand comments made while watching Rose sleep or in moments when exhaustion lowered his guard. And with each revelation, I found myself drawn to him in ways that both thrilled and terrified me. One afternoon in early April, he arrived at the cottage carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. Rose had just woken from her nap, and I was sitting by the window with her on my lap, showing her the new leaves on the oak trees outside. He knocked, as he always did now, and waited for me to bid him enter, a courtesy that still surprised me. Mrs. Ashford, he said, inclining his head. I hope I am not disturbing you. Not at all. Your Grace, I replied, standing with Rose in my arms. She has been wondering when you would visit. She missed you. He smiled, one of those rare, genuine smiles that transformed his entire face. Did she tell you that herself? In her way, I said. She looked at the door 3 times this morning. He laughed, a low, rich sound that warmed the room, and came forward to take Rose from me. She went to him easily now, her small hands reaching for his face, and he held her with a confidence that had grown over the months. It still amazed me, watching this powerful, controlled man melt into tenderness the moment Rose touched him. I brought her something, he said, gesturing to the package he had set on the table. I thought she might enjoy it. I unwrapped the paper carefully, revealing a small wooden toy, beautifully carved and painted. It was a horse, delicate and detailed, with a flowing mane and kind eyes. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly expensive, and I looked up at him in surprise. "This is too fine," I said. "She will not understand its value." "Its value is in her joy," he replied. "And she need not understand it to appreciate it." I placed the toy in Rose's hands, and she clutched it with delight, making soft cooing sounds as she examined it with intense concentration. The Duke watched her, his expression unguarded, and I saw such longing in his eyes that my chest tightened. "You love her," I said quietly. It was not a question. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he carried Rose to the window, holding her up so she could see the garden beyond, where early flowers were beginning to bloom. "I should not," he said finally. "It complicates everything." "Love always does," I replied. He glanced at me over his shoulder, and something passed between us, a current of understanding that needed no words. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Loving her?" "No," I said. "I could never regret that." He nodded slowly, as though I had confirmed something he already knew. Then he turned back to Rose, and we stood in silence, the three of us bound together by a secret that felt less like a burden now, and more like a gift. That evening, after he had left, and Rose was asleep, I sat by the fire and allowed myself to acknowledge the truth I had been avoiding for weeks. I was falling in love with Alexander Grayson, the Duke of Ravencourt. It was foolish and dangerous and utterly impossible, but it was as real as the breath in my lungs. I loved the way he looked at Rose, as though she were the most precious thing in the world. I loved the way he listened when I spoke, giving me his full attention as though my words mattered. I loved the glimpses of vulnerability he showed me, the moments when the mask slipped and I saw the lonely, grieving man beneath. But I also knew that nothing could come of it. We existed in different worlds, separated by a chasm of class and circumstance that no amount of feeling could bridge. He was a duke. I was a widow of modest birth, living in his cottage, caring for his sister's illegitimate child. Whatever connection we had forged in these quiet months would end the moment Rose no longer needed to be hidden. He would return to his world of balls and duties and suitable matches, and I would return to mine, carrying the memory of what might have been if we had been different people in a different time. The thought filled me with a grief so profound it took my breath away. The next week brought unexpected visitors. I was hanging washing in the small garden behind the cottage when I heard voices approaching through the trees. I froze, my heart pounding, wondering if someone had discovered us. But then I recognized Mrs. Brennan's voice, and with her a woman's laughter, light and musical. I hurried inside, gathering Rose quickly, and had just settled her in the cradle when Mrs. Brennan appeared at the door, accompanied by a woman I had never seen before. She was perhaps 25, beautiful in the way that came from privilege and care, with golden hair arranged in perfect curls and a dress that must have cost more than I earned in a year. She looked at me with open curiosity, her blue eyes assessing, and I felt suddenly conscious of my plain cotton dress and the flour that dusted my sleeves from the morning's baking. "Mrs. Ashford," Mrs. Brennan said, her tone apologetic, "this is Lady Pemberton. She is a friend of His Grace and insisted on meeting you." The woman smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I have heard so much about the mysterious Mrs. Ashford," she said, her voice sweet as honey and just as thick. "His Grace speaks of you often. I confess I was curious." I curtsied, my mind racing. "Lady Pemberton," I said, "I am honored, though I cannot imagine why His Grace would mention me. I am simply caring for a child." "Ah, yes, the child," Lady Pemberton said, moving past me into the cottage without invitation. "Mrs. Brennan shot me a warning glance before following. Lady Pemberton looked around the room, taking in every detail, before her gaze settled on the cradle where Rose slept. "She is quite small," she observed. "How old?" 5 months, I replied, positioning myself between her and the cradle instinctively. "And her mother, Lady Pemberton asked, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. Deceased, I said, using the story the Duke and I had agreed upon. I am caring for her as a favor to His Grace, who knew her family. How charitable of you, Lady Pemberton said, though her expression suggested she found nothing charitable about it at all. And how fortunate for His Grace to have found someone so willing to live in seclusion. It must be quite lonely here. I find solitude peaceful, I replied, and the child is good company. She smiled again, and I saw calculation in her eyes. Of course, she said, though I wonder how long such an arrangement can last. Surely the child will need proper society eventually. Education, a place in the world. His Grace will decide what is best when the time comes, I said, keeping my voice steady. Lady Pemberton studied me for a long moment, and I felt her taking my measure, weighing some unspoken question. Then she turned to Mrs. Brennan. I believe I have satisfied my curiosity, she said. Shall we return to the manor? His Grace is expecting me for tea. After they left, I sank into a chair, my hands trembling. I did not know what game Lady Pemberton was playing, but I knew it was dangerous. She had looked at me as a threat, though I could not fathom why. I was nothing to the Duke, nothing but the woman caring for his sister's child. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. That evening, the Duke arrived in a state of barely controlled fury. He burst through the door without knocking, his face dark with anger, and I stepped back instinctively. Lady Pemberton came here, he said. It was not a question. Yes, I replied. This afternoon, she wished to meet me. He cursed under his breath, a word I had never heard him use. I told her to stay away. I made it clear that you were not to be disturbed. She seemed quite determined, I said. May I ask why she was so interested? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I had rarely seen from him. Because she believes we are lovers, he said bluntly. Because she cannot fathom any other reason why I would visit a woman alone so frequently. And because she intends to be my wife and sees you as a rival. I felt the blood drain from my face. Your wife. An arrangement my mother has been orchestrating for years, he said bitterly. Lady Pemberton is the daughter of an earl, wealthy, well-connected, and perfectly suitable. My mother believes the match will restore our family's standing after Catherine's scandal. Lady Pemberton believes it will make her a duchess. I have told them both I have no interest, but they are persistent. And what do you want? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a storm of emotions. What I want does not matter, he said. What matters is duty, obligation, the future of the estate. What matters is keeping Rose safe and ensuring my family's name survives. That is not an answer, I said. He stepped closer, so close I could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, the tension in his jaw. What I want, Mrs. Ashford, is impossible. It has been impossible from the moment I saw you holding Rose in the chapel. But wanting something does not make it attainable. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Your Grace, I began, but he shook his head. Alexander, he said. When we are alone, you may call me Alexander. I swallowed hard. Alexander, I said, and the name felt like a prayer on my lips. If Lady Pemberton believes we are lovers, will she not cause trouble? Will she not expose Rose? She has no proof of anything improper, he said. And I have made it clear that if she speaks against you, she will answer to me. But this cannot continue. It is not safe for you, or for Rose. What are you saying? I asked, though I feared I already knew. I am saying that I must find another arrangement, he said. Someone else to care for Rose, somewhere farther away, where there can be no question of impropriety. No, I said, the word torn from me. You cannot take her from me. You promised. I promised to keep her safe, he said, and that is what I am trying to do. She is safe here, I insisted. With me. She knows me. She trusts me. If you send her away, you will break her heart. And mine. The words hung between us, raw and honest, and I saw him flinch as though I had struck him. Eleanor, he said, and it was the first time he had used my given name. His voice was rough, broken. Do you not see? This is why I must do this. Because I cannot bear the thought of causing you pain. Because every time I am near you, I forget every rule I have ever lived by. Because if I do not put distance between us now, I will ruin us both. I felt tears burning my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Then ruin me, I said. I do not care about society. I do not care about scandal. I care about Rose, and I care about you. He closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. You should not, he said. I have nothing to offer you. No future, no promises, only shadows and secrets. Then I will take the shadows, I said. I have lived in them long enough to know they are better than being alone. He opened his eyes, and what I saw there made my breath catch. Longing, desperation, hope. He reached out slowly, as though afraid I might disappear, and cupped my face in his hands. His touch was gentle, reverent, and I leaned into it, closing my eyes. If I kiss you, he whispered, I will not be able to stop wanting you. I will not be able to let you go. Then do not let me go, I said. He kissed me then, soft and hesitant at first, as though testing the waters of something forbidden. But when I kissed him back, pouring all my longing and fear and hope into that single act, he deepened the kiss, pulling me against him, and I felt the world narrow to this moment, this man, this impossible, beautiful mistake we were making together. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. What have we done? He murmured. I do not know, I said, but I cannot regret it. He held me for a long time, his arms strong and sure around me, and I let myself believe, for just a moment, that love might be enough. That we could find a way through the maze of society and secrets and scandal to something real and lasting. But even as I held him, I felt the shadow of Lady Pemberton's presence, and I knew our happiness was fragile as glass, waiting for the first stone to shatter it. The weeks that followed the kiss were both the happiest and most terrifying of my life. Alexander came to the cottage nearly every evening, after his duties at the manor were complete, and we would sit by the fire while Rose slept upstairs, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood, about the weight of expectations that had been placed on him from birth, about the loneliness of being raised to lead rather than to live. I told him about my marriage, about Thomas's gentle nature, and the way he had made me feel seen when the world preferred to overlook women like me. We spoke of our losses, our regrets, our dreams deferred. And sometimes we did not speak at all. Sometimes he simply held my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm, and we sat in comfortable silence, knowing that words could not capture what we felt. In those moments, I allowed myself to imagine a different life, one where he was not a duke and I was not a widow caring for his sister's illegitimate child. One where we could simply be Alexander and Eleanor, two people who had found each other in the darkness and decided to hold on. But reality has a way of intruding on even the sweetest fantasies. It was mid-May when Lady Pemberton struck. I had taken Rose outside to enjoy the spring sunshine, letting her feel the grass beneath her fingers and watch the butterflies that danced among the wildflowers. She was nearly 6 months old now, growing stronger each day, and her laughter had become my favorite sound in all the world. I was so absorbed in her joy that I did not hear the carriage approach until it was too late. Lady Pemberton stepped down from her vehicle with the same calculated grace she had displayed during her first visit, but this time she was not alone. With her was an older woman, stern-faced and dressed in black, whom I recognized immediately from the miniature portrait I had seen in the village church. The Dowager Duchess of Ravencourt, Alexander's mother. I stood quickly, clutching Rose to my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs. Lady Pemberton smiled, that cold, triumphant smile I had learned to fear. "Your Grace," she said, addressing the Dowager. "May I present Mrs. Eleanor Ashford, the woman who has been caring for your son's ward." The Dowager's eyes, sharp and assessing despite her age, moved over me with the efficiency of a magistrate passing judgment. "So, you are the mysterious Mrs. Ashford," she said, her voice clipped and aristocratic. "My son has been most evasive about your situation. Perhaps you can enlighten me." I curtsied as best I could while holding Rose, my mind racing. "Your Grace," I said. "I am honored to meet you, though I confess I did not expect visitors today." "No," the Dowager said, her gaze moving to Rose. "I imagine you did not. Lady Pemberton has been most insistent that I see for myself the child my son has installed here. She believes there is more to this arrangement than Alexander has revealed." "There is nothing improper, Your Grace," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I am simply caring for the child, as His Grace requested." "And whose child is she?" the Dowager asked. "My son claims she is the daughter of a distant relation who passed away. But Lady Pemberton has made inquiries, and no such relation exists." I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. "The child's parentage is not mine to discuss," I said. "You must ask His Grace." "How convenient," Lady Pemberton said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Though I must say, Mrs. Ashford, the child bears a striking resemblance to the Grayson family. That dark hair, those eyes, one might almost think she was related by blood." The Dowager stepped closer, and I saw her study Rose with an intensity that made my stomach clench. "Let me see her properly," she commanded. I had no choice but to comply. I turned Rose so the Dowager could see her face, and I watched as recognition flickered across the old woman's features. Her expression shifted from suspicion to shock to something harder, more dangerous. "This is Catherine's child," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My God, this is my daughter's child." Lady Pemberton's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Then you see it too," she said. "I thought I was imagining the resemblance, but now that you mention Catherine, it is unmistakable." The Dowager looked at me, and I saw 1,000 questions in her eyes, but also something else. Pain. Deep, unhealed pain. "Where is Catherine?" she demanded. "Where is my daughter?" I swallowed hard, knowing I could not lie, not about this. "She is gone, Your Grace," I said softly. "She died of consumption several months ago. She asked His Grace to care for the child." The Dowager's face went pale, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. Lady Pemberton moved to support her, but the older woman waved her away. "How dare he?" the Dowager said, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare Alexander hide this from me? That was my daughter, my child, and he kept her death a secret." "He was trying to protect you," I said. "To protect the family from scandal." "Scandal," the Dowager spat. "He speaks to me of scandal when he has been visiting you here, alone, night after night. When he looks at you the way a man looks at a woman he desires. Do you think me a fool, Mrs. Ashford? Do you think I do not see what is happening under my own roof?" "Your Grace," I began, but she cut me off with a sharp gesture. "You will pack your belongings and leave this estate immediately," she said. "You will take the child with you, and you will never return. I will not have my son's reputation destroyed by a common widow with designs above her station." The words struck me like a physical blow. "I am not trying to trap your son," I said, my voice breaking. "I am trying to care for a child who has no one else." "Then you have failed," Lady Pemberton said, "because she has family now. The Dowager will see that she is properly cared for. You are no longer needed." I looked at Rose, sleeping peacefully in my arms, oblivious to the fact that her world was being torn apart. I thought of all the nights I had walked the floor with her, all the tears I had wiped away, all the songs I had sung. I thought of the way she smiled when she saw me, the way she reached for me when she was frightened. She was not my daughter by blood, but she was mine in every way that mattered. "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "I will not abandon her. His Grace entrusted her to me, and I will not break that trust." The dowager's eyes narrowed. "You forget yourself, Mrs. Ashford. You have no legal claim to this child, no rights whatsoever. If you refuse to comply, I will have you removed by force and charged with kidnapping." "Then do so," I said, lifting my chin. "But know that Rose will scream for me, that she will not understand why the only mother she has ever known has been taken from her. And that will be on your conscience, not mine." For a moment, I saw something flicker in the dowager's expression. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition of the truth in my words. But then Lady Pemberton spoke again, her voice sharp. "Your Grace, we cannot allow this woman to manipulate you with sentiment. She is clearly hoping to use the child to secure her position with your son. We must act decisively." The dowager hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard the sound of hooves approaching at a gallop. Alexander appeared around the bend, his horse lathered with sweat, his face a mask of fury. He dismounted before the animal had fully stopped and strode toward us, his eyes fixed on his mother. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "I was told you had come here without my knowledge." "I came to see the truth for myself," the dowager said, her voice cold. "And I find that Lady Pemberton's suspicions were correct. You have been hiding Catherine's child. You allowed me to believe my daughter was alive when she has been dead for months." "I was protecting you," Alexander said, his voice rough. "Catherine made me promise not to tell you. She knew the shame would destroy you. So instead you destroyed her," the dowager shot back. "You cast her out. You refused to help her when she needed you most. And now you dare to claim you were protecting me." "I tried to find her," Alexander said, and I heard the anguish in his voice. "I searched for months. By the time I received word of her condition, it was too late. I could not save her. All I could do was honor her final wish and protect her daughter." The dowager looked at Rose, and I saw tears shining in her eyes. "She is all I have left of Catherine," she said, "all that remains of my youngest child, and you would have kept her from me forever." "Not forever," Alexander said. "Only until the scandal had faded, until I could bring her into the family without destroying everything Catherine died to protect." The dowager shook her head. "You should have trusted me. You should have told me the truth." "And what would you have done?" Alexander asked. "Would you have accepted an illegitimate grandchild? Would you have welcomed her into Ravencourt Manor and announced to society that Catherine bore a child out of wedlock? Or would you have done exactly what I feared and sent her away to some distant relation where she would grow up knowing she was a shameful secret?" The silence that followed was deafening. The dowager looked away, and I saw the answer written plainly on her face. Alexander saw it too, and his expression hardened. "That is what I thought," he said. "That is why I made the choices I did. Because I knew that no one would love her the way she deserved to be loved. No one but Mrs. Ashford." He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw gratitude and regret and something deeper that made my heart ache. "She has been more than a caretaker to Rose," he said to his mother. "She has been her mother in every sense that matters, and I will not allow you or anyone else to take that from her." Lady Pemberton stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "And what of me, Your Grace?" she said. "What of our understanding? Your mother arranged our match with the expectation that you would do your duty to the family. But instead, you have been conducting an affair with a common widow, neglecting your responsibilities and allowing yourself to be ruled by sentiment rather than sense." Alexander looked at her, and I saw something cold and final in his expression. "There has never been an understanding between us, Lady Pemberton," he said. "That was a fantasy constructed by you and my mother. Nothing more. I have made it clear from the beginning that I have no intention of marrying you. But the family, Lady Pemberton sputtered, the estate, the future, will be secured in my own way and in my own time, Alexander said. Now I ask that you leave my property. Immediately. Lady Pemberton's face went white with fury. You will regret this, she hissed. I will make certain that all of London knows about your sordid arrangement, about the bastard child you are harboring, about the widow you have taken as your mistress. By the time I am finished, the Grayson name will be synonymous with scandal. Then you will accomplish what my sister could not, Alexander said quietly. But I will not be blackmailed into a loveless marriage to protect a reputation that is already tarnished beyond repair. Lady Pemberton turned on her heel and stalked back to her carriage, her movements sharp with rage. The dowager watched her go, then looked at her son. You are making a mistake, she said, one that you will spend the rest of your life paying for. Perhaps, Alexander said, but it will be my mistake to make. The dowager's gaze moved to me, and I saw resignation in her eyes. Very well, she said. If you are determined to follow this path, then I will not stand in your way. But understand that society will not be kind to either of you, and the child will bear the weight of your choices. She deserves to know her family, Alexander said. She deserves to grow up knowing she is loved, not hidden away like something shameful. Will you help me give her that, or will you turn your back on your own granddaughter? The dowager was silent for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and held out her arms. May I hold her? She asked, her voice soft now, almost broken. I looked at Alexander, and he nodded, carefully. I placed Rose in the dowager's arms, watching as the old woman looked down at her granddaughter for the first time. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she made no effort to hide them. She has Catherine's eyes, the dowager whispered, and her father's stubbornness. Oh, my dear girl, what did you suffer? What pain did you endure alone? Rose reached up and touched the dowager's face, her small hand gentle, and something in the old woman's expression softened. She is beautiful, she said, and you are right. She deserves to be loved, to be welcomed. I will do whatever I must to ensure she has that. Alexander let out a breath I did not realize he had been holding. Thank you, Mother, he said. The dowager looked at me, her eyes still wet. And you, Mrs. Ashford, you have cared for her when no one else would. For that, you have my gratitude. But I must ask you something, and I beg you to answer honestly. Do you love my son? The question hung in the air, stark and undeniable. I felt Alexander's eyes on me, waiting, and I knew that whatever I said in this moment would determine the course of our lives. Yes, I said simply. I love him. The dowager nodded slowly, as though this was what she had expected. Then, know that the path ahead will be difficult. Society will condemn you both. There will be whispers and cut invitations and doors closed in your faces. Are you prepared for that? I met her gaze steadily. I have already lost everyone I loved once before, I said. I am not afraid of society's judgment. I am only afraid of losing what I have found here. The dowager looked at her son, and something passed between them, some unspoken understanding. Then you are braver than I was, she said, and perhaps wiser. I spent my life bowing to the dictates of society, and it cost me my daughter. I will not make that mistake again. She handed Rose back to me, her touch gentle. Care for her, she said. Love her, as Catherine would have wanted, and know that you have my blessing, for whatever that is worth. After she left, Alexander and I stood together in the garden, Rose between us, and I felt the weight of what had just transpired settle over us like a mantle. We had survived the storm, but I knew others would come. Lady Pemberton would make good on her threats. Society would turn against us. The future was uncertain at best and potentially ruinous at worst. But as Alexander took my hand and raised it to his lips, kissing my knuckles with a reverence that made my breath catch, I knew I would face whatever came. For him, for Rose, for the family we had somehow become in the shadows of secrets and scandal. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice low. "Once this becomes public knowledge, there will be no going back. You will be forever linked to me, to this scandal. Your reputation will be destroyed. My reputation was destroyed the day I became a widow, with no fortune and no family," I said. "I have nothing left to lose except you, and I am not willing to lose that." He pulled me close, his arms strong around me, and I felt his heart beating against mine. "Then we will face this together," he said, "as we should have from the beginning." I looked up at him, at the man who had come to me on Christmas Eve with a child and a desperate plea, and I saw my future written in his eyes. It would not be easy. It would not be what society expected or approved, but it would be real. It would be honest, and it would be ours. That night, as I put Rose to bed and sang her the lullabies that had become our ritual, I thought about Catherine, about the young woman who had loved unwisely but completely, who had chosen her heart over her duty and paid the ultimate price. I hoped, wherever she was, that she knew her daughter was loved, that she knew her sacrifice had not been in vain. And I made a promise to her, silently, in the darkness of the nursery. I would give Rose the life Catherine had dreamed of. I would teach her to be brave, to choose love over fear, to believe that she was worthy of all the good things the world had to offer, regardless of the circumstances of her birth. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not scandal or society or the arbitrary rules that governed our world. Only love, only family, only the courage to fight for what we knew was right, even when the entire world stood against us. Lady Pemberton was true to her word. Within a week, the whispers began. By the second week, they had grown into a roar that echoed through every drawing room in London. The Duke of Ravencourt, it was said, had taken a common widow as his mistress and installed her in a cottage on his estate to raise his sister's bastard child. Some versions claimed the child was actually his own, the product of an affair he was now flaunting before society. Others suggested I had entrapped him with feminine wiles and was even now plotting to become the next Duchess. The truth, as always, was both simpler and more complicated than the gossip allowed. Alexander warned me it would be difficult, but I had not anticipated the sheer viciousness of society's judgment. Letters arrived at the cottage, unsigned and poisonous, calling me names I would not repeat, and threatening consequences I tried not to imagine. The tradespeople in the village, who had once greeted me warmly, now averted their eyes when I passed. Even Mrs. Brennan, who had shown me nothing but kindness, became more formal in her interactions, as though creating distance between herself and the scandal that surrounded me. But Alexander did not waver. He came to the cottage every day, arriving in full view of anyone who cared to watch, and he held his head high as though daring the world to condemn him. The dowager, to my surprise, proved equally steadfast. She visited twice a week, sitting with Rose for hours, telling her stories of Catherine that I knew would one day matter to the child. And slowly, painfully, she and I began to forge something that resembled friendship, bound together by our love for Rose and our determination to protect her from the cruelty of the world. It was the dowager who suggested the solution that would change everything. She came to the cottage on a warm afternoon in June, when the roses were in full bloom and Rose was 7 months old, beginning to crawl and explore her world with fearless curiosity. I served tea in the small sitting room, and we watched as Rose pulled herself up on the furniture, babbling happily to herself. "She grows more like Catherine every day," the dowager said, her voice soft with memory. "That determination, that spirit. Catherine was always the one who refused to accept no for an answer. She was brave," I said, "to follow her heart despite the cost." The dowager set down her teacup and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, "Eleanor, may I speak plainly with you?" "Of course, Your Grace," I replied, though her tone made me uneasy. Alexander loves you, she said. Anyone with eyes can see it. And I believe you love him as well. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I do not understand what you mean. Do you not? She asked. My son visits you daily. He defends you to anyone who dares speak against you. He looks at you the way his father once looked at me, before duty and disappointment hardened us both. But he cannot marry you as things stand. The scandal would destroy what little remains of the family's reputation, and Rose would suffer for it. I know, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I have told him as much. I have offered to leave, to take myself out of the equation so that he can find a suitable match and secure the family's future. And what did he say to that? The Dowager asked. He refused, I admitted. He said he would rather face scandal than lose me. The Dowager smiled, a sad, knowing smile. That is because he is his father's son, stubborn to a fault. But there may be another way, a way that would allow you both to have what you want while protecting Rose and securing the family's position. I leaned forward, hardly daring to hope. What way? Society has already condemned you as his mistress, she said. The damage is done. But what if we used that to our advantage? What if, instead of denying the rumors, we confirmed them, but with a twist? I do not follow, I said. The Dowager reached across and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. What if we announced that you and Alexander had been secretly married months ago, before the scandal broke? That you came to the cottage as his wife, not his mistress? That Rose is not Catherine's child at all, but your daughter from a previous relationship, and Alexander has taken her as his own? I stared at her, my mind reeling. But that would be a lie. Rose is Catherine's daughter. We cannot deny her that legacy. We are not denying it, the Dowager said. We are protecting it. If we reveal the truth about Rose's parentage, she will be labeled illegitimate for the rest of her life. Every door will close to her. Every opportunity will be denied. But if she is presented as your daughter, adopted by Alexander, she can have a normal life. She can marry well. She can have the future Catherine wanted for her. And what of Catherine's memory, I asked. Do we simply erase her? Pretend she never existed? No, the Dowager said firmly. We tell Rose the truth when she is old enough to understand. We preserve Catherine's letters, her portrait, everything that will help Rose know her mother. But publicly, we protect her from the stigma of illegitimacy. Is that not what Catherine would have wanted? I thought of the miniature portrait in the locket, of the young woman who had given up everything for love and lost. Would she want her daughter to suffer the same fate, or would she want Rose to have the chances she herself had been denied? What does Alexander think of this plan? I asked. I have not told him yet, the Dowager admitted. I wanted to speak with you first, because this plan requires something of you as well. It requires you to marry my son, to become the Duchess of Ravencourt. And that is not a small thing, Eleanor. It is a lifetime of scrutiny and obligation and expectations. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Rose, pulling herself up on the sofa, her face bright with triumph. I thought of all the nights I had spent alone, believing I would never love again. I thought of Alexander, who had chosen me over duty, over reputation, over everything society said he should value. And I thought of Catherine, who had taught me that sometimes the only way to honor love was to fight for it, regardless of the cost. Yes, I said, I am prepared. The Dowager squeezed my hand. Then we shall make it so. But we must move quickly, before Lady Pemberton can do more damage. I will arrange for a special license. The wedding will be small, private, witnessed only by those we trust. And then we will announce it as having occurred months ago when you first came to Ravencourt. By the time society realizes they have been deceived, it will be too late to object. You will be the Duchess, and Rose will have the protection of the Grayson name. When I told Alexander of his mother's plan that evening, I expected him to refuse. to insist on doing things properly. But instead, he listened in silence, his expression unreadable, and when I finished, he simply said, "When?" "When what?" I asked. "When will you marry me?" he said. "Today, tomorrow, this very moment, if you will have me." I laughed, surprised by the emotion that welled up in me. "Your mother suggested we wait until the arrangements are made. A few days, perhaps." He shook his head. "I have waited long enough, Eleanor. I have spent months watching you from across rooms, wanting to touch you and not daring to. I have spent years doing what was expected, what was proper, and it brought me nothing but emptiness. I do not want to wait another moment to make you my wife." "Then we will not wait," I said, and kissed him there in the cottage, with Rose sleeping upstairs and the summer evening growing dark around us. We were married 3 days later in the private chapel at Ravencourt Manor, with only the Dowager, Mrs. Brennan, and the vicar as witnesses. I wore a simple dress of cream silk that the Dowager had given me, and Alexander wore no title or finery, just a dark suit that made him look younger somehow, more like the man I had come to know in the quiet hours of the cottage than the Duke's society feared and respected. The ceremony was brief. The vicar, an old friend of the family who owed the Grayson name more favors than he could count, asked no questions about the unusual circumstances. He spoke the words that bound us together, and when Alexander slipped the ring onto my finger, a simple band of gold that had belonged to his grandmother, I felt something shift inside me. A weight I had carried for years, the weight of loneliness and loss, seemed to lift. I took the vows seriously, knowing what they meant. I was no longer Eleanor Ashford, widow and organist. I was Eleanor Grayson, Duchess of Ravencourt, and with that title came responsibilities and challenges I could barely imagine. But as Alexander kissed me, his lips warm and certain, I knew I would face them gladly, because I would not face them alone. The announcement appeared in the Times a week later. The Duke of Ravencourt was pleased to reveal that he had married Mrs. Eleanor Ashford in a private ceremony several months prior, and that his wife had brought to the marriage a daughter from a previous relationship whom His Grace had adopted as his own. The child would be known as Rose Grayson and would be raised at Ravencourt Manor alongside any future children the Duke and Duchess might have. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Some members of society were outraged at the deception, at the fact that Alexander had married so far beneath his station. Others were simply relieved that the scandal had a respectable resolution, even if the timeline seemed suspiciously convenient. Lady Pemberton, I heard, went into seclusion at her father's country estate and refused to show her face in London for the rest of the season. But there were also those who surprised me. Old friends of the Dowager who called to offer their congratulations and support. Neighbors who came to pay their respects and meet the new Duchess. Even some of the young women who had once competed for Alexander's attention acknowledged that he seemed happier now than they had ever seen him. The transition to life at the manor was not easy. I had to learn the intricate rules of running a ducal household, the endless responsibilities of managing staff and entertaining guests and representing the family at social functions. The Dowager helped where she could, though her own health was beginning to fail, and Mrs. Brennan proved invaluable in teaching me the practical aspects of my new role. But the hardest part was learning to accept that I belonged here, that I had a right to occupy this space, to wear these beautiful dresses, to be addressed as Your Grace. I had spent so much of my life on the margins, overlooked and underestimated, that stepping into the center felt like standing in too bright sunlight after years in shadow. Alexander, sensing my discomfort, made a point of including me in every decision, seeking my opinion on matters large and small. He introduced me to his tenants and showed me the parts of the estate that he loved most. The wild places where he had played as a child and later escaped when the weight of duty became too heavy. And at night, when we were alone in the vast bedchamber that had once belonged to his parents, he held me and reminded me that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Rose thrived in the manor. The dowager doted on her, teaching her nursery rhymes and reading to her from the same books she had once read to Catherine. Alexander was equally devoted, spending hours on the floor playing with her, making her laugh with silly faces and gentle teasing. And I watched them together, this man and this child, and marveled at how love could transform even the most rigid heart. On a crisp September morning, when Rose was 10 months old and beginning to take her first tentative steps, the dowager asked to speak with me privately. We sat in her sitting room, a space filled with mementos of her long life, and she handed me a leather-bound journal. "This belonged to Catherine," she said. "She kept it during her time away from Ravencourt. I found it among her belongings when Alexander brought them back after her death. I have read it, and I believe you should as well. When Rose is older, when she asks about her mother, you will need to know what to tell her." I took the journal carefully, feeling the weight of it in my hands. "Thank you," I said. "I will treasure this." The dowager smiled, though her eyes were sad. "Catherine was foolish in many ways," she said, "but she was also brave. She chose love over comfort, passion over security. She paid a terrible price for that choice, but I do not believe she regretted it. Not truly. And because of her courage, because of her sacrifice, Rose exists. That is not nothing, Eleanor. That is everything." I opened the journal that night, after Alexander had fallen asleep, and read Catherine's words by candlelight. She wrote of her love for the artist, a man named Thomas, which gave me a strange jolt to realize he shared my late husband's name. She wrote of her joy when she discovered she was pregnant, and her terror when Thomas left her. She wrote of her illness, of the cold and hunger and loneliness that had consumed her final months. But most of all, she wrote of her hope that her daughter would have a better life, that she would know love and security and all the things Catherine had lost. The final entry was dated 2 days before Alexander arrived in Manchester. It read, "I have sent word to my brother. I do not know if he will come or if he will forgive me for the shame I have brought upon our family, but I must try, for her sake, for my little Rose, who deserves better than I can give her. If Alexander will not take her, I will leave her somewhere she will be found, somewhere God will guide her to safety. I pray it is enough. I pray she knows, somehow, that she was loved." I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face, and pressed it to my chest. Catherine had trusted that love would be enough, even when she had no proof it would. And in the end, it had been. Her daughter was safe. Her daughter was loved. And her story, though tragic, had led to something beautiful. The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. The dowager passed away peacefully in her sleep when Rose was 2, surrounded by family and at peace with the choices we had made. Alexander grieved deeply, but he took comfort in knowing that his mother had lived to see Rose happy and thriving. Society gradually accepted our unconventional family, though there were always those who whispered and speculated. But as Rose grew older, it became impossible not to love her. She had Catherine's beauty and spirit, but also a sweetness and wisdom that were entirely her own. She called me Mama and Alexander Papa, and if she sensed that her origins were more complicated than the story we had told the world, she never questioned it. When she was 7, I gave her Catherine's journal and told her the truth. I sat with her in the library, the same room where Alexander and I had first begun to understand each other, and I told her about the young woman who had loved her so much that she had sacrificed everything to give her a chance at life. Rose listened with solemn attention, her dark eyes never leaving my face. "So my real mother died to save me," she said when I finished. "Yes," I said, "she loved you more than anything in the world." Rose thought about this for a moment. Then she looked at me and said, "But you are my real mother too, because you chose to love me even though you did not have to. That makes you just as real." I pulled her into my arms, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom of her words. "You are right," I said. "Love is what makes us family, not blood. And you are loved, Rose, by me, by your father, by your grandmother who watches over you from heaven, and by Catherine, who gave you the greatest gift she could. And I will love my babies the same way when I am grown, Rose said with the confidence of childhood. I will love them so much that nothing can ever break us apart. Over the years, Alexander and I had 3 more children, 2 boys and a girl, and Rose was the best sister they could have asked for. She told them stories of the brave lady who had lived long ago and made sure they were born, and they listened with wide eyes, treating Catherine like a fairy tale princess who had existed in some magical time. The cottage where Rose and I had spent those first precious months remained special to us. We kept it as it had been, visiting on special occasions. And sometimes I would sit by the fire and remember the night I had found a baby on the chapel steps and my life had changed forever. I would think of the Duke who had appeared like a dark angel, desperate and afraid, and who had somehow become my greatest love. I would think of all the choices we had made, the rules we had broken, the scandal we had endured, and I would know with absolute certainty that I would make every choice again. Because love, real love, is worth fighting for. It is worth the whispers and the judgment and the sacrificing of comfort and security. It is worth everything, because without it, we are only half alive. On the day of Rose's 18th birthday, we held a ball at Ravencourt Manor, the first in years. She wore a gown of silver silk that made her look like starlight, and every young man in the county fell over himself to dance with her. But the moment I cherished most came late in the evening, when Rose pulled Alexander and me aside and said, "Thank you for giving me this life, for loving me when I had no one, for being brave enough to choose each other, even when the world said you should not." Alexander and I looked at each other, and in his eyes I saw the same emotion I felt: pride, gratitude, and the deep, abiding love that had sustained us through every trial. "You gave us a life too," I told Rose. "You brought us together. You reminded us that some things are worth more than reputation or propriety or the approval of people who do not matter. You taught us how to be a family." Rose hugged us both, and over her shoulder I caught sight of Catherine's portrait, which we had hung in the ballroom for this occasion. She was watching over us, I thought, this young woman who had made such hard choices so that her daughter could have a different future. And I hoped she knew that her sacrifice had not been in vain, that Rose had been loved and cherished every day of her life, that she had been worth everything. Later that night, as Alexander and I prepared for bed, he pulled me close and said, "Do you ever regret it? The scandal, the struggle, everything we endured. I thought of the life I might have lived if I had never found Rose on the chapel steps, safe, quiet, utterly alone. And I thought of the life I had instead, full of love and laughter and children who filled every corner of Ravencourt with noise and joy. Not for a moment, I said, not ever." He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and I felt the same flutter in my chest that I had felt the very first time, in the cottage so many years ago. Some things, I realized, never fade. Some loves only grow deeper with time, rooted so firmly that nothing can shake them. That Christmas Eve, 20 years after I found Rose, I walked to the chapel in Greystone Village, the place where everything had begun. Snow was falling, just as it had that night, and the world was hushed and waiting. I stood on the steps where I had found a basket with a tiny baby inside, and I said a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided me to that moment. Because on that snowy evening, when I was at my lowest, when I believed my life held nothing but loneliness and grief, I had been given a gift: a child who needed love, a man who needed hope, a family that needed healing. And in giving them what they needed, I had found what I needed as well: purpose, belonging, a love that would last all my days. The chapel bells rang, calling the faithful to Christmas service, and I turned to walk back to Ravencourt, to my husband and children, and the life we had built together from the ruins of scandal and sorrow. The snow fell softly around me, blessing the path home, and I knew with certainty that I had found what every human heart seeks: not perfection, not ease, but love, real, messy, complicated, glorious love, the kind that saves us, the kind that makes us whole. And in the end, that was all that mattered.